Deputy Chambers, yours is question 80.
Thank you, Taoiseach. My question is to ask you for an update on the status of preparations for Brexit, and in particular the contingency planning that has been done across all of the departments for all of the various potential Brexit scenarios, and if you make a statement, Taoiseach.
Thanks, Deputy. I've already outlined to the House our overriding priority at present is to work towards the finalisation of the draft withdrawal agreement and the political declaration on the EU-UK future relationship. However, any Brexit scenario will mean considerable change and impact for Ireland. We are taking forward extensive and detailed Brexit preparations and contingency work across all government departments and agencies. As part of prudent preparation for Brexit, steps need to be taken at a national level, at an EU level and at a business and citizen level as well. The underlying strength and resilience of our economy is critical to ensuring that Ireland is in the best possible position to respond to the challenges of Brexit. And this has been a key factor in developing successive budgets, including the last one. The Government has already taken a number of key decisions on measures to be put in place for the necessary checks and controls for trade on an east-west basis between Britain and Ireland. The recruitment of an additional 1,000 staff, it's actually 1,077, for customs and SBS controls, in addition to ICT and infrastructure measures at our ports and airports, has been sanctioned and implementation is already underway. Various contingency measures, such as the rapid redeployment of customs staff, are also under active consideration in the context of a disorderly Brexit scenario. Businesses and other affected sectors need to respond and prepare themselves, and the Government is providing an array of supports and information measures to assist them. Specific support measures and schemes are now in place for businesses and across the agri-food sector. To better inform our businesses and citizens, the Getting Ireland Brexit Ready public information campaign was launched in September. Very successful outreach events were held in October, and more will follow this month. We're in Limerick on Friday, Letterkenny next Friday. Of particular relevance to citizens is the work on the Common Travel Area to ensure that the arrangements by which Irish and British citizens can live, work and access public services in each other's countries will continue into the future, regardless of what Brexit scenario unfolds. In a number of key areas, the appropriate response and mitigation will be at an EU level, and we are continuing to engage actively with the Commission on areas of priority for Ireland. The Commission has flagged the particular impact of Brexit on Ireland and Irish businesses and its contingency planning in its contingency planning communication last week.
Thank you, Taoiseach.
Ireland is also working closely with fellow Member States to discuss areas of key concern, particularly facilitating the use of the UK as a land bridge post-Brexit.
Deputy Chambers.
Taoiseach, given the current uncertainty regarding Brexit, I think it's imperative that we continue to plan for all possible eventualities. Last week, after the withdrawal agreement was announced, Simon McKeever of the Irish Exporters Association said companies were increasingly looking to take action around issues like customs and stockpiling of goods. He noted that there is a huge demand for warehousing space for the pharma and food and drink sectors, both here and in the UK, and the companies are pre-placing items in the event of a hard Brexit. McKeever is quoted as saying, "I wouldn't describe it as a sense of panic, but we are starting to see the signs of concern that we have put our eggs in the basket of a deal and mitigating against outcomes in a deal scenario. There really isn't a plan B if there isn't a deal." Taoiseach, I also note that the Parliamentary Budget Office in the aftermath of the recent budget said, and I quote, "No sensitivity analysis has been provided by the Government on the impact of changes to the Irish output induced by a hard Brexit on revenue and expenditure projections. In addition, conventional economic models are based on historic long-run relationships between economic variables and may not adequately capture the impacts of unprecedented shocks, such as the occurrence of a disorderly Brexit. Due to the significant uncertainty over the nature of the future trading relationship between the UK and the EU and a consideration of recent developments on negotiations, it may not be prudent to plan on the basis of an ordinary Brexit." And Taoiseach, certainly in light of recent comments by the Taoiseach of 5 years of planned tax cuts, I do think in terms of our over-reliance on just balancing the books over the next number of years, that is simply enough to prepare for a hard Brexit. Taoiseach, I would urge you that it definitely isn't, and we need to be preparing for all possible scenarios. And Taoiseach, I'm equally concerned about the uptake of Brexit supports, and as of the 12th of October, figures released to me and the Fianna Fáil party, only 8.5 million has been sanctioned at bank level of the 300 million available of the Brexit loan scheme, and only 137 Be Prepared grants have actually been approved by Enterprise Ireland, and that equates to about 3% of Enterprise Ireland firms. So, Taoiseach, it does seem the case that still businesses are not as prepared as they should be.
Taoiseach.
Deputy, with respect, our job is to keep calm and plan, as opposed to the way in which you respond sometimes to these issues. I've just been with Simon McKeever for an hour and a half at an Export Trade Council. I'm going to see him later on this evening at a Brexit stakeholders meeting for a couple of hours. So you know, we are talking to all of the key stakeholders. I'll be talking to hundreds of businesses again on Friday in Limerick. We'll be doing the same in Letterkenny next week. We are planning in the areas where we can predict outcomes, and we are planning for all potential outcomes. But what we're not going to do is we're not going to add to a sense of panic. What we should be doing for the next 2 to 3 weeks, which is the timeline that we have before the vote in Westminster, is to actually talk about the deal that has been agreed, which solves many of these problems, and to help maximise the chances of it being fully understood in a reassuring way, so that we can increase the chances of it passing, as opposed to ratcheting up tension about what will happen if it doesn't pass. If it doesn't pass, we have to respond to that, and we will. And we've been working for months to prepare for that. And I'll bring new contingency plans to government in response to that. We'll work with industry, we'll work with other political parties, we will work in the national interest. But you know, let's not create some kind of self-fulfilling prophecy here. Our job is to calmly plan for all outcomes, to try to predict what's coming down the tracks in a few weeks' time, and to advocate strongly for a deal that is good for Ireland, fair for the UK and fair for the EU.
Thank you, Taoiseach.
That negotiating teams have taken 2 years to put in place, and that should be our focus between now and the vote in Westminster.
Deputy Chambers.
Let's leave the condescension at the door. I think we are all being calm, but I think it's prudent and I think it's reasonable that an opposition party can ask the government what planning is being done and ask for details of that planning. And the quote that I gave you from Mr McKeever, they were his own words. They're not mine, they're his words. And yes, you say you're talking, but are you listening? I've given you figures that have been given to me by your own government in terms of take-up of Brexit supports. They're very low. That's a fact. That's not opinion, that's a fact. And I think it's very reasonable to ask the questions that if we don't get the deal we're looking for, and I appreciate we all want the deal to go through, but I think it's very reasonable to ask the question, what is Plan B? And other countries, other member states are releasing details of their contingency planning. The UK is doing that. We are simply asking that that be done here as well, that you actually inform the House and inform citizens. If you've done preparations and you've planning done, what are the details? What exactly does that look like? And last week in the Chamber, Regina Doherty, the Minister for Social Protection, outlined that her department has been working for almost a year on individual schemes that has reciprocal rights between Great Britain, Northern Ireland and the Republic, to ascertain what exactly we need to do to maintain those reciprocal arrangements. But the outcome of this analysis, even though it's been happening for the last year, that detail is not available. So you and your government have the information, you have the detail, but you're not providing it to the rest of the House. That's why we're asking the questions. So again, Taoiseach, I acknowledge that it's difficult to be fully prepared for all scenarios, but I think it's reasonable and it's not in the interest of ramping up pressure or creating difficulties. But if I were not asking the questions, I wouldn't be doing my job.
I've explained many times that there's some information available to government during a negotiation process that you don't put into the public domain. We make no apologies for that. None. Our job is to get a deal here, and we got one last week. And we did that by trying to negotiate with Michel Barnier and his team, working with the UK as well, exploring solutions and so on, to try and find a fair way forward for everybody. And we focused on getting an outcome, as opposed to focusing on contingency in terms of public communication. That doesn't mean we haven't been putting contingency plans together, and I've talked to you about contingency plans, as I've talked to many others. We signed off on 1,077 extra customs officials, SPS officials, or inspectors, I should say, from the Department of Agriculture and the Department of Health. If you look at Dublin Port today, they are preparing and investing in terms of contingency planning linked to Brexit. We've said the primary focus will be on east-west inspection infrastructure in the Port of Rosslare, the Port of Dublin and in Dublin Airport. There are a raft of supports and advice available for companies. Some of those are relatively new. They've only been out for the last couple of months, and so the uptake is building all the time. But you are right to ask the question as to whether we are putting contingency plans in place or thinking about how we would react if Westminster votes against a deal. And of course we're thinking about that. But my judgment is that our primary focus should be on trying to talk about the deal that was done last week, which is still live and there, because we want it supported, as opposed to moving on and focusing our attention on failure.